What if Deku was the son of Mirko? Chapter 7. So, Usagi, do you have a plan? Uraraka asked as she turned to face Izuku with her normal bubbly self. I don't like the idea of teams. I plan to go off and fight Bakugo and then search for the bomb. Izuku answered almost instantly. But, Usagi, wouldn't it be better to stay together just in case one of us needs backup? I mean, I'm not doubting your strength or anything, but if Bakugo and Ida are together, then we could have a higher chance of beating them, right? Knowing Bakugo, he's probably going to go straight for me and ignore the objective. I do better solo anyways. If I want to call myself a hero, then I'll have to be able to take on challenges like this by myself, so if needed I will capture them both. Izuku stated with absolute confidence. But what will I do? Uraraka asked in worry. Search for the bomb if you want, just don't get in between me and Bakugo. It could get a little violent, and the last thing I want is collateral damage. No offense Uraraka, but you don't seem to have any combat experience. Uraraka looked down in shame. She knew he was right and that she would probably just get in the way of her teammate, so she internally promised herself that she would get better and be able to fight other people while utilizing her quirk. Alright. Let's begin the indoor combat training. Team A and Team D, your time starts now. All Might shouted over the intercom. Immediately after All Might announced the start of the battle, Izuku leapt away into the entrance, leaving behind a small gust of wind that snapped Uraraka out of her stupor. She immediately focused on the building and began to jog into the building far behind Izuku. Pay attention, kids. Think about what you would do. All Might told the rest of the class who were observing the battle through a few monitors without audio. Izuku bounced from wall to wall while searching for any signs of the enemy team, or the bomb. He made sure to always keep his ears alert and his eyes focused, while scanning each room he flew by. After searching for the bomb on the second floor, he quickly dashed upstairs to start his search on the next floor, and then moved on to the third after getting the same results. Why hasn't Bakugo attacked already? He should have already been waiting for me on the bottom floors. Izuku thought as he came to realize Bakugo wasn't on the third floor either. Izuku stopped jumping and closed his eyes. After realizing that his first strategy wasn't working, he started to focus everything on his hearing and pressed his right ear flat against a wall. It will be hard to hear any movement through these thick walls, however, if I focus enough, I should be able to hear even small vibrations like the sound of footsteps. However, when he listened, he could only hear the sound of Uraraka running through the halls below him. Don't tell me Bakugo is actually planning this out and I assumed wrong. But why would he suddenly change his normal tactics? He probably told Ida about my quirk, and they are most likely staying perfectly still in order for me to not notice them. Which would mean the best place for them to hide would be the top floor. Bakugo intends to stay on the top floor because it would be harder for me to hear anything from down here. Also, since he's going through the lengths of concealing his presence, he most likely intends to spring some kind of trap on me. Isn't that something? Bakugo not only relying on his instincts. Well, I accept the challenge. As Izuku finished his thoughts, a manic grin spread across his face while he shot up the stairs to quickly get to the top floor. Once Izuku made it to the top floor, he started to become more cautious as he inspected the hallways. When he went down one more hallway, that's when he noticed Bakugo standing there in the middle staring at him. Oi, Usagi. Come and fight me. I'm ready to kick your ass. Bakugo said with a grin. While still being cautious, Izuku ran towards him. Bakugo immediately turned around and blasted off away from Izuku, which surprised him, but it also made the theory of a trap more plausible, so Izuku put his guard up even more when chasing Bakugo. Izuku followed him through the hallway and into a wide open room where Bakugo stood in the middle. I see, he lured me into a wide open room so I couldn't gain acceleration faster, by bouncing from wall to wall, but it will also hinder him as well. It will be harder for him to hit me with an explosion unless he releases bigger explosions to cover a wider range, but that requires more force, which will wear him down faster. Izuku voiced in his head as he analyzed his surroundings, but something still threw him off, because there were no obvious changes to the room that would hint about a trap being set, and another detail was Bakugo's right-hand grenade gauntlet seemed to be missing. Bakugo made the first move by launching himself at Izuku, which in turn Izuku promptly dodged. While still in midair, Bakugo immediately redirected himself back at Izuku with his explosions. Izuku jumped back to dodge an oncoming explosion and landed onto a wall which he leapt off of to another wall, and kept continuing this action to increase his speed. No, you don't. Bakugo yelled as he reached both arms outwards, and started releasing consecutive explosions while spinning, making the entire room be filled by nothing but the sight of Bakugo's explosions. One explosion managed to hit Izuku, but he was barely phased and decided that it was the moment to attack, so he leapt off of the wall with one more jump, this time with more effort. He soared at Bakugo like a missile with his foot outstretched for a kick. Bakugo barely had any time to react, but due to his training, instincts, and distance from the wall to the center of the room, he managed to aim a hand at him, releasing a huge explosion directly at Izuku because it could be his last chance to hit him. However, instead of flying back, Izuku went straight through the explosion with his metal shoes taking the brunt of the attack, and smoking from the heat. The attack only seemed to have slowed down Izuku's attack if only just a tiny bit. What? Bakugo exclaimed in his mind as he took a foot to the face and flew back across the room and hit his back on the wall behind him. With his cheek caved in and droplets of blood dripping from his nose, he stood back up and glared at Izuku while he assessed the fight so far. What the hell was that? He was completely unfazed by that attack. No, wait. Of course, he took countermeasures against heat and brute force. Those shoes aren't just made of metal, are they? After Bakugo had finished his thoughts, he launched himself back at Izuku, which Izuku copied, and kicked off the spot he was standing from to lunge directly at each other. To Izuku's surprise, Bakugo didn't aim his hands at him, but instead, he put his hands together. At first, nothing had happened, but then a bright light and thunderous sound echoed in the room. Flashbang. Bakugo yelled after he had used his move almost directly in Izuku's face. Izuku's senses were being overwhelmed by the loud bang and the bright light, but luckily, he had the common sense to close his eyes and flatten his ears at the last second to minimize the damage. Izuku was prepared for many different attacks Bakugo would most certainly use on him while he was still dazed, since he had trained under his mother. Weaknesses like this were accounted for, but to Izuku's surprise once again, there were no attacks coming his way. Once Izuku regained his bearings, he looked around the room for Bakugo, then he realized Bakugo had used that chance to escape rather than attack. This confused him for a bit because it wasn't like Bakugo to use a hit-and-run strategy. However, he decided to put it in the back of his mind for now and to locate Bakugo again. Man, this sure is a crazy battle, but why did Bakugo run away? That wasn't very manly, exclaimed Kirishima, who was pumped when he had witnessed the display of power and skill by the two rivals. Maybe Bakugo isn't as rash as he first appeared, and he has a plan in mind. Ribbit. The frog-like girl remarked while placing a finger over her lips in thought. Izuku was jumping down the hallways where he had heard Bakugo's explosions coming from. When he had finally reached the hallway Bakugo was at, he saw him at the other end. The hallway was narrower, and would allow Izuku to accelerate easier, but also make it harder to dodge wider explosions. Why the sudden change of tactics? Surely, he didn't change his plan just because I landed a hit on him. No, this is probably just the next step, and for whatever reason, the last fight was just to buy time. Izuku voiced in his head as he scanned the hallway for anything suspicious, but nothing seemed out of place. What's wrong, Usagi? Scared to come and fight me? Bakugo shouted with a challenging grin. Izuku scoffed at his remark. He thought it was ironic because of how Bakugo had just ran away twice during this lesson already, and yet he was being called the coward. Despite knowing it was bait, Izuku obliged him and started bouncing on the walls to pick up the pace as he hopped down the hallway. Once Izuku started getting close, Bakugo's mouth curved into a wide manic smile as he lifted his left arm and pointed it down the hallway towards Izuku. After positioning his arm, Bakugo used his right arm to grab the pin on his grenade gauntlet. Young Bakugo. Don't pull that pin. You could kill him. All Might yelled into the communicator. All Might. Shut up. He can take it. Besides, this is the only way to take him down. Bakugo had dropped his smile and replaced it with a determined expression, which had shocked everyone who saw it. The boy that was always filled with anger and confidence didn't have a hint of either one on his face at that moment. Izuku had recognized what Bakugo was doing, and had already figured out what the grenade was probably for, but there was no way to go, and he wasn't fast enough to go back or reach Bakugo in time. Izuku threw himself backward to create more distance so that the explosion wouldn't hurt him as badly, and at the same time, Bakugo pulled the pin. Boom! The entire hallway lit up in a blaze of fire, smoke, and rubble. The hallway's walls were giving way as the building shook for a few seconds. After the shaking had stopped, what was left of the hallway was covered in a large cloud of smoke. Bakugo was staring intensely into it with his fist clenched in anticipation. That was insane. A boy with blonde hair, and a black lightning bolt going through it yelled while being slack-jawed in awe of the pure destruction from Bakugo's quirk. Will Usagi be alright? A pink-skinned girl questioned with a bit of concern in her voice. Yeah, Usagi may be tough. But I think that was a little too far. Kirishima said as he rubbed the back of his head in concern for his new friend. Was that Bakugo's plan? It seems a little dangerous, but the two know each other, so they wouldn't go as far as trying to kill the other one, right? Ribbit the frog girl commented while still having her normally expressionless face directed at the monitor. Young Asui is right. I'm sure young Bakugo knows how much young Usagiyama can take, and he's confident that he didn't severely injure him. All Might reassured the class, which caused a lot of them to relax. After a few seconds, the smoke started to clear, but before it did, a figure leapt out and aimed a kick at Bakugo's head. He immediately reacted by blocking the kick with his now empty grenade gauntlet that shattered upon the impact, and sent Bakugo flying backward down the hallway and knocking the breath out of him once he hit the floor, and skid to a halt. Out from the smoke was Izuku, who had a torn-up costume and small burns here and there on his skin and rabbit ears, but overall, he didn't seem to be hurt much. No way. How is he even still conscious? An attack like that should have killed someone. A boy with black hair and a triangular mouth shouted in disbelief. I believe I know the reason. A feminine voice spoke up that caught the class's attention. The girl had a raven-haired ponytail with onyx eyes and a red hero suit that barely covered any skin. Usagiyama laid flat on his stomach with his armored shoes facing in the direction of Bakugo so that he would minimize the damage, while protecting his front. Honestly, his skills and instincts must rival that of a veteran, pro, or even surpass some from what I've seen so far, and his moves seem oddly familiar. Yaoyorozu explained her thoughts to the class while in a thinking pose. You think Usagiyama was trained by a pro? The frog-like girl questioned the raven-haired girl. Maybe, and I think I know who it is, but it's only speculation. Yaoyorozu answered. Well, tell us who it is. The boy with a lightning bolt in his hair demanded. It's not my place to tell. If you really want to know, then you should ask Usagiyama when his match is over. AWW. Don't leave us hanging like that. The boy pouted. Hey. The battle isn't over, guys. Kirishima said to draw the class's attention back to the screen. Damn it. Bakugo shouted in frustration as he staggered to his feet. My left arm is bruised and might even have a minor fracture. I can't use big explosions with it anymore, or else the recoil will just make it worse. If my gauntlet hadn't taken most of the blow, then my arm might have been broken from that kick. Those damn shoes really make his kicks pack more of a punch, Bakugo voiced in his head as he grunted in pain from his now purple arm. Do you give up? Izuku asked with a teasing grin. Huh? Bakugo replied with irritation etched in his voice. If you tell me where the bomb is, then I wouldn't have any reason to kick you again. Izuku taunted playfully. Bakugo's veins surfaced on his head as he processed what he just heard, and a tick mark appeared to show his rising anger. Damn it, Usagi. Of course, I don't fucking give up. This battle isn't over until one of us is dead. You hear me? Bakugo shouted back. Good. I wouldn't have it any other way. Izuku yelled with a wide grin on his face as he got into a runner stance and dashed forward towards Bakugo. Now. Bakugo shouted as he grinned while looking at Usagi. A fraction of a second passed before the wall next to Izuku crumbled, and an armored foot came out with blue flames coming out of the back, slammed into Usagi's right cheek. Izuku didn't have time to react, and he didn't hear it coming because his senses were still recovering from the earlier blast, so the only thing he could do was clench his jaw to make sure it didn't break from the impact. After the transfer of force occurred, Izuku went crashing straight through a wall and cratered into another wall that was behind it. I see, so that was his plan. The explosion earlier wasn't meant to put me out of the match, but rather hinder my senses, and so that flashbang earlier was also just to weaken them and distract me so he could lure me into here. He had this planned from the beginning. However, I know we're supposed to act as villains, Bakugo, but was it necessary to use my maximum speed to hit Usagi? I wouldn't want to. Shut up, glasses. This fight isn't over yet. Bakugo interrupted Ida as he turned to look at Izuku, who was still cratered into the wall and got into a battle stance. Ida was about to question Bakugo's sanity, but as if to answer all of the questions rushing in his mind, Izuku peeled himself off of the wall and hopped onto his feet. He still wore a smile as if his swollen cheek and other injuries were non-existent. Ida was shocked for a second, but now that he realized his kick somehow didn't knock out Usagi, he put his thoughts aside and obeyed Bakugo by getting into his own fighting stance. Izuku analyzed his two opponents and noticed that Bakugo's right gauntlet was on Ida. So that's their plan, huh? So, I wouldn't be able to destroy both after I figured out what the grenades were for. Since Ida is faster, he also has more of a chance to hit me dead on with an explosion. Take his right side. Bakugo yelled as he used explosions from his right hand to skid across the floor and get on Izuku's left side. Right. Your time is over, hero. Ida yelled as he boosted himself to get on Izuku's right side. Two fast opponents coming from opposite sides, huh? I guess I'll need to focus on hearing to keep track of their whereabouts. Izuku locked his ears on the both of them as they began to rush towards him, on either side. Ida had swung his leg for a flying kick at Izuku's head, but this time he was prepared for it and so, it was swiftly dodged, and then countered with an uppercut to the side of his knee. The armor plating cracked from the force and Ida was thrown off his path from the pain and sudden punch, so he went spiraling away, into the air. Immediately after Ida's attempt, Bakugo was above Izuku by manipulating his explosions to project himself at an angle into the air. He pointed his hand downwards at Izuku to release an explosion on him, but Izuku had already expected this and hit Bakugo's arm, to instead aim at Ida. It was too late to discharge the explosion, so it went off, and managed to hit Ida in the chest while he was still in mid-air. From the explosion, Bakugo went backward from the recoil and landed on his feet, while Ida hit the ground, harshly with a now cracked and burnt chest piece. Teach. Bakugo hissed in irritation as he glared at Izuku, then his irritated look turned into a smirk as he glanced where Ida was on the floor. Izuku curiously followed his gaze and saw that Ida was still laying on the ground, but he was pointing the gauntlet at Izuku and had his other hand reaching for the pin. His hands were shaky from the pain he was in, but he still managed to grab hold of it. Izuku realized he needed to get away quickly. However, the only escape was the hole Ida made in the wall earlier, since Bakugo and Ida were blocking both sides of the hallway. Thinking quickly, Izuku leapt backward into the hole. When Ida pulled the pin, there was the normal click sound that Izuku was expecting. However, there was no explosion or even a small hint of something happening. Izuku stared in confusion at Ida before drifting his gaze over to a Bakugo who had a feral grin plastered on his face with his hand touching the wall. For a split second Izuku was extremely confused about the situation, but then he smelled it. Something sweet and familiar. It was nitroglycerin. Izuku swung his head left, right, up and down frantically, just to realize the situation he was in. The entire hallway, he was coated in nitroglycerin. No. He planned this far? The first step was to distract me, while Ida emptied the gauntlet into this hallway. Then the second was to hurt my senses so that I would have to put more focus into using them. Then the third step was to make me focus on using my now damaged hearing so that I wouldn't use my nose to detect the nitroglycerin. Then the final step was to lure me into this trap by making this my only option of escaping the fake attack. Izuku's eyes widened in shock as Bakugo ignited his hand against the wall, and then all hell let loose. There was no escape. With the substance completely surrounding him, he had no choice but to get blasted from all directions. The building's roof gave way to the enormous explosion and a shockwave broke nearly all the windows in the surrounding buildings, while the whole city shook as if an earthquake was happening. Bakugo and Ida were thrown backward by being in close proximity to the epicenter. Due to the explosion not being contained in the grenade gauntlet, it lost accuracy but had gained in power by being spread in a wide area, as if filling a room with dynamite. Sir, isn't this a bit extreme? The frog-like girl shouted in worry as she tried to make her voice louder than the roar of the explosion in order for it to reach All Might. Well, those guys are freaking crazy. Mineta yelled as he lost his balance and fell onto his rear from the shaking of the building. The monitors went to static for a bit until one of the surviving cameras switched on to reveal nothing but smoke. All Might immediately pressed his communicator to contact the two teams. Are all of you all right? That was reckless. All Might shouted with a worried tone. Bakugo coughed as he waved away the smoke while he was lying flat on the ground. Yeah, All Might. We're fine. Now that we dealt with Usagi, does that mean we won? Bakugo yelled back, unconcerned for anything else except his victory. Ida grunted in pain and looked towards the smoke, his eyes widened with just how destructive their plan was. Half of the entire top floor was now gone, only rubble, small fires, and smoke lay on the new roof of the building. If I had known it would have been this destructive, I wouldn't have agreed to a plan like this. Despite playing the villain role, going this far is just. Ida cut off his thoughts and looked down in disgrace as he clenched his fists in frustration. Look. A tall teen with white hair and multiple limbs shouted to get the class's attention. Everyone looked at the screen and saw a shadowy figure, slowly walking out of the smoke towards Bakugo and Ida. Bakugo had noticed the small movement in the smoke and had just marked it off as just seeing thing, but when it didn't go away his eyes widened. No. That's impossible. No one can get up from that. No one. Bakugo yelled in a mix of desperation, disbelief, and anger. Izuku walked out of the smoke with a wide toothy smile on his face. His costume at this point was just rags. He was burnt almost everywhere on his entire body and he was bleeding in a few places from shrapnel scraping his body. There was still smoke fuming from his clothes and skin by the intense heat that had scorched him. Damn, that hurt. I can't even use my hearing at all after that one, Izuku said jokingly. He was really hurt all over, and should have been knocked out at this point, but his mother's training had taught him how to completely ignore the pain, and resist trauma. The Usagiyamas had an unnaturally high pain tolerance that would almost appear as a separate quirk, but was actually the result of years of training. Ida had already looked up from his position, but could only lay there in disbelief at the sight he was seeing. Before he had the chance to react, Izuku had run over to Ida and bashed his head into the floor with a swift stomp for a quick knockout. At this point, Bakugo had gotten out of his rant and stood up to face Izuku with a livid scowl on his face. He immediately raced towards Izuku with his right palm outstretched. I still have a chance. He may be acting tough right now, but he's clearly slower than earlier. I can still win. Bakugo screamed in his head. Izuku had noticed Bakugo's charge. He was full of openings and uncaring at what happened to him at this point. Izuku got into a stance ready to leap into action, but before they came to clash once again, Bakugo had halted from the booming voice of All Might. The hero team wins. Huh? Bakugo said in a confused manner. Noticing the change of expression and the sudden stop from his charge, Izuku guessed that the match was over, and so he relaxed. He didn't have his communicator anymore, because it was destroyed during the explosion, not that he could have heard it anyways due to his ears constantly ringing. Hey, Usagi. We did it. I touched the bomb. Uraraka yelled while waving cheerfully. Sorry, I cannot hear you right now. Usagi yelled, although he had no idea if he was yelling or not. Woa? Are you alright? What happened here? I heard a big bang and the building shake a couple of times, but you all look seriously banged up. Uraraka said while her gaze drifted with worry over Usagi, Ida, and Bakugo. Izuku sighed from her, ignoring his last explanation. After that, Bakugo was completely quiet while he walked slowly behind Izuku, who was giving a now barely conscious Ida some support to stand upright while the three of them walked to recover girl's office, as ordered by All Might. Uraraka had walked to the monitor room despite her protests to see if Usagi and Ida were alright. She was immediately greeted by many stares from her classmates, which made her extremely nervous, while she was unaware of the full situation that had undergone. Can anyone guess who the MVP of this match is? All Might questioned the class. A bunch of mixed opinions was flung out of all the students' mouths without waiting for anyone else to answer. Hold on. Hold on. One at a time, please. All Might said as he waved his hands for them to quiet down. The first person to raise their hand was Yaoyorozu, and so All Might nodded towards her to give her his approval. The MVP of this match was Uraraka. Huh? Uraraka said in a shocked/unbelieving tone. Let me explain. While Usagiyama had displayed his masterful set of skills and power, he had disregarded the whole point of this lesson, by abandoning his teammate, Uraraka, to go off on his own and without a real plan. Bakugo, although he had a very well thought up plan and has displayed valuable skills to be a good pro hero like Usagiyama and had worked with his teammate, was ignorant of Uraraka. His plans were entirely set up for Usagiyama and he did not even remember Uraraka was there, which was his downfall. Also, his plan was reckless, although I give him credit for thinking of the damage by using the top floor as not to damage and collapse the entire building by blowing up a supporting wall on the lower floors. In addition, he seemed to have it out for Usagiyama, which made him completely focus everything on him rather than protecting the bomb. Ida cannot be MVP, because he had gone along with his teammates' reckless decisions and plans without ever objecting, or giving his own input on the plans for the lesson. Although it was commendable that he had at least tried to act the part. Last is Uraraka. She had wanted to plan with her teammate, which was supposed to be the point of the lesson. The only reason why she had gone off on her own was that her teammate had refused to work with her. Then she was also the only one solely focused on the mission, rather than the fight, which had paid off when she had floated herself window to window looking for the bomb. So, therefore, Uraraka is the MVP of the battle. Momo gave her long explanation and critique of the battle, which dumbfounded everyone in the room and made Uraraka tear up in happiness from the praise. Why yeah. You nailed it? All Might said while he gave her a thumbs up as he shook nervously from the girl's analysis that was in way better detail than his thought-out explanation. One should always devote themselves wholeheartedly to learning, that's the only real way to become a top hero. Yaoyorozu said with absolute confidence in what she was saying. Everyone was still looking at her like she grew a second head. Although in this world that might be normal. Well, let's move on to the next match. Please watch carefully and decide what your plan of action is going to be for your own matches. Also, make sure you do not make any of the same mistakes as the last match. All Might said as he clapped his hands together to get their attention. Yes, sir. End of chapter 7.